Let me begin by welcoming everyone who's joining us this afternoon for Finding Moses Williams, an event sponsored jointly by the Library Company's Program in African American History and the Center for American Art and the Philadelphia Art Museum. I am Sarah Weatherwax, Senior Curator of Graphic Arts at the Library Company. It was about a year ago when Carol Soltis, one of our speakers this afternoon, approached me with the idea of doing a program focused on Moses Williams. I thought it was a great suggestion, and I was happy to jump on board, but it has primarily been Carol who has shaped her initial idea into the program we will enjoy today. This afternoon, we're going to hear from 5 different speakers who have each been allotted 15 to 20 minutes to present their talks, followed by about 10 minutes for questions. Your questions and comments should be placed in the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your screen. I will read out as many questions and comments as I can in the immediate aftermath of each presentation, but we have also allotted a few minutes at the end of the program for additional questions that can be directed to any of our speakers. Our program this afternoon is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent to all of you who have registered. Feel free to share the link with others or direct them to the Library Company's channel on YouTube for viewing the recording. I'm now going to turn the virtual podium over to Wynn Akins, who serves as the Library Company's reference librarian and African American history subject specialist. Wynn will provide us with a brief overview of the library's program in African American history.
Hi, can everyone see my slides? Gonna assume that is a yes. Hi everyone. As Sarah mentioned, I'm here to share a bit about our program in African American history, which we also refer to as PA. PA is led by the brilliant Jim Downs, director of the program and a prolific historian, author, editor, and professor who many of you already know if you're regulars at our events and conferences. And my name is Wynn Akins. I'm a reference librarian here in the Scheide Reading Room, which I'm currently sitting in, and a subject specialist for our Black History collections. And I help support PA's research, programming, and public engagement. So PA was established in 2007 with support from the Albert M. Greenfield Foundation and has continued strong ever since. Bringing together fellows, scholars, library company members, community culture workers, and many others to explore the depth and breadth of Black life in the Americas. At the heart of this work is the Library Company's Afro-Americana collection, one of the most comprehensive archives of printed material by and about people of African descent in the world. The collection began to take shape in the late 1960s in the wake of the Civil Rights Movement, when staff intentionally identified and cataloged materials relating to Black history as a unified body of work. The collection spans an extraordinary range: early descriptions of pre-modern African societies, the long struggle for justice and emancipation through slavery, war, and Reconstruction, as well as diasporic migrations, bibliographic innovation, and the cultural renaissance of the early 20th century. It includes books, pamphlets, newspapers, periodicals, broadsides, photographs, graphics, and so much more. And though it's not as widely publicized, we also hold a remarkable collection of modern reference books from the 1940s to present day, which analyze the past, present, and future of Black life, art, history, and culture. Many of these volumes were researched with the use of our collections, and many were written or gifted to us by our fellow scholars and friends. For today's program, I selected a few materials that highlight the breadth of what we hold, including, of course, the early 19th century hollow cut silhouettes by Moses Williams, which we'll explore more today, as well as a first edition of The New Negro, a Harlem Renaissance classic edited by Elaine, who was, of course, born right here in Philadelphia, featuring the iconic stylized silhouettes of artists like Aaron Douglas and Lenold Rice that helped define the Black American modern art tradition, and including a first edition of My Compliment, My Enemy, My Oppressor, My Love, gifted to us by the publisher, showcasing Kara Walker's striking and unsettling silhouette tableaus with an introductory essay that directly references the Moses Williams silhouettes held here at the Library Company. On a single visit to our reading room, you can encounter the struggle and the violence of the Black archive, the realities of Black enslaved and free people denied freedom, education, and self-determination, and yet you also encounter the resistance, the undercommons, and the brilliance and ingenuity that emerged anyway, seeding the many lives and traditions that we continue to study today. So please feel free to make an appointment and come visit us here at the Library Company to explore these amazing collections and stay up to date on the program in African American History collection by visiting us online. You can see the URL there on the screen and subscribing to our emails. Applications are also currently open for our fellowships, and more info is coming soon on our Black History Month program and more. So thank you all, and I will stop sharing and turn it back over to Sarah.
Thank you, Wynn. Our first main speaker this afternoon is Dr. Carol Soltis. She is Project Associate Curator at the Philadelphia Art Museum, and her presentation this afternoon is entitled Finding Moses Williams in the Peale Sellers Profile Album.
Good afternoon. We're going to start by taking a look at the profiles that I have been working on. As a group, our speakers today are going to offer many new facts about the life of Moses Williams and his family. But in our presentations, Lauren and I will both begin and end the program by focusing on the quality and character of the actual profile portraits famously cut by Moses for Charles Willson Peale's Philadelphia Museum, beginning in 1803. My research on Moses Williams profiles began with the task of accessioning a profile album that had descended in the Peale Sellers family and was part of the extensive body of work by the Peale family of artists that was given to the Philadelphia Museum of Art by Robert L. McNeill, Jr. My task was supposedly simply to enumerate and identify the small cut paper profiles that were installed in the album and that had come into the collection attributed to Moses. However, it soon became apparent that many of the 172 profiles in this collection varied significantly in their quality and character. In this slide, you can see that clearly there was a lot of work to be done in sorting through this album. It should be noted, however, that family profile collections like the Peale Sellers Family Album embraced not only immediate family, but also friends and more distant family members who exchanged profiles as tokens of love and friendship, and even as annual updates on the growth and likeness of their children. Understanding this context in which such albums were assembled accounted for the less adept profiles that were most likely cut elsewhere and by someone other than Moses Williams. This, of course, did not necessarily make their gifting less meaningful to their recipients. But knowing that Moses had enjoyed great success with his profile cutting, and that Charles Willson Peale had high praise for the quality of Moses profiles, I began to sort through the collection for what I could reasonably attribute it to Moses to establish a baseline for what a profile cut by Moses Williams might look like. That is, what was characteristic and consistent in his cutting that could facilitate the identification of his work and establish his artistic identity. And these two, what you can see is a quote above here from Charles Willson Peale, quote, "The perfection of Moses's cutting supports its reputation for correct likeness." And of course, having a strong likeness, that you really would recognize the person, was a very important aspect of a profile. We tend to think of these profiles as sort of having an anonymous quality to them. But I think the wonderful thing about Moses's profiles is they are not anonymous. Well, this might be anonymous, This is much less anonymous you have because you see the careful cutting that has been done here. And as Lauren will talk about later, these are hollow cut profiles. So these are not simple tracings. They are much more difficult to accomplish. I just want to say a word here on what we're looking at. This is, of course, the Pennsylvania State House, and this is in an engraving by William Birch and Son of 1799. If you look through here, this is the American Philosophical Society building, which still stands, and above the door in this print, you can see a little plaque that says museum. So this was the site of the Peale Museum, but in 1803, 1802, 1803, just in that transition moment, Peale extends his collection, which has grown amazingly, into the State House itself. And at that moment, he not only transfers his mastodon skeleton, which he had been showing in the Philosophical Society, but becomes the moment when the physiognotrace gets installed also. So this is sort of a magic year here for our story, 1802. Um, as the child born in 1776 to a couple who had been enslaved by Charles Willson Peale until he freed them in 1786, Moses remained Peale's slave until he was granted his freedom in 1803 and was given the concession to operate the museum's newly installed attraction of the physiognotrace. Moses appears to have grown up largely within the confines of the Peale family home and museum, although his parents lived nearby. Moses' work within the museum included learning taxidermy, helping assemble and promote displays, and to Charles Willson Peale's surprise, helping complete the assembly of the great mastodon skeleton that Peale had unearthed in New York State and put on display in the museum in 1802, where it drew international recognition from the scientific community. Peale wrote that, quote, the most expert anatomist could not have found the fitting of a fracture better than those of the least knowledge, as was exemplified by the fact that Moses Williams fitted pieces together by trying the most probable, but by the most improbable position, as the lookers-on believed. Yet he did more good in that way than anyone among them who were actually employed for the work, unquote. Clearly Moses, excuse me, clearly Moses was clever and literate. He was a problem solver and participated in promoting the museum's displays. There are references to his musical talents, and he apparently participated in the performances offered at the museum. Later newspaper reminiscences of the museum described him as, quote, pleasant and witty, as well as an expert fellow in his vocation, which was, of course, profile cutting. Moses' exemplary profile cutting attracted swarms of new museum visitors, while also making Moses a rich man, able to purchase a house, raise a family, make loans, and purchase luxury items. Peale's desire to install a device for creating affordable profile portraits that one could purchase on a visit to Peale's museum had been stimulated by the appearance of profile portraits created by French émigrés in America during the period of the French Revolution and the unsettled years that followed. Some had been transferred as some had been, trained as high-ranking military officers and were adept at drawing and the use of mechanical devices. They had arrived with their portable physiognotrace style machines and were active along the eastern seaboard, where American-born artists like Rembrandt and Raphael Peale emulated their work. Although Rembrandt probably only produced drawings like the one seen here from 1799, Raphael's production was probably more extensive. He created profiles that were drawn, possibly cut, and he also, of course, was producing watercolor on ivory miniatures. Here was the mastodon. Here is, of course, Independence, the State House. Here was where the Peale Museum was. Here is the physiognotrace drawing, which we'll talk about again in a minute. And here, of course, was my main point. So sorry about this, that this was what I encountered in the album. It was both a Moses Williams, we find a Moses Williams profile, and we find these other we don't know who did these profiles, and there's a great difference in being able to sort out between hands in terms of a crude cutting, a very generalized cutting, and of course, a much more sensitive cutting that we see in Moses, which we'll be able to talk about more in a couple minutes. Okay, and here are examples of the work of Saint Memon. And St. Memon had, of course, arrived he was in New York, he was in Philadelphia, and he was actually active in Philadelphia right before the physiognotrace is installed in the Peale Museum. The physiognotrace, of course, for creating profiles was established in France. It was created by someone called Gilles-Louis Chrétien, a cellist at the court of Louis XVI. These machines created quick, inexpensive, and accurate profiles, and they were established in Paris by 1786. And the term Etienne de Silhouette, a disgraced French finance minister, became associated with cheap, inexpensive goods and with inexpensively produced profiles. They were cut out of black paper, and they were called silhouettes in France. They were called shades in Britain and profiles in America. Only later in the 19th century was there the term silhouette adapted in America. But not all silhouettes were inexpensive, and the most notable French silhouettist who visited America, Saint Memon, created both stunning, lifelike, large-scale drawings and small engravings after these larger likenesses that functioned as portrait miniatures. His profiles, however, were luxury items designed for only the most affluent members of the population. He was prolific and hardworking, and ultimately he created a virtual who's who of famous and affluent Americans before returning to France. But of course, the popularity and affordability of drawn or cut paper profiles was probably stimulated by all of these wonderful production going on, and it was a very clever thing for Peale to have a physiognotrace installed in the museum. In December of 1802, the English inventor John Isaac Hawkins gave Charles his newly created version of the physiognotrace, um, and this was installed in the museum in December. It's here illustrated in a letter from Peale to Thomas Jefferson in January 1803, and this would have been the device, in fact, that Williams used to create his hollow cut profiles. After the profile was traced, a fine result was only achieved, however, if the likeness was further articulated by using fine, sharp scissors. This required particular attention and dexterity. Over 8,500 profiles were cut during the first year of its operation, and it created enormous enthusiasm for profiles that were valued for their accuracy of likeness and affordability. Members of the Peale family, which you see here, became my key for establishing what would be the characteristics of a profile cut by Moses. This is because I could approximately date the profiles in this group through age or associated documentary details that assign them all to the early years of Moses' activity at the museum. These were the kind of profiles cut by Moses that Charles Willson Peale saw and praised. So they become a kind of Rosetta Stone for looking at other profiles and how they may vary. So just quickly, as you can see here, this is Raphael and Rubens at the top, Charles Willson Peale in the middle, his second wife, Eleanor de Peyster Peale, his third wife, Hannah Moore Peale, and at the bottom, his son-in-law, Coleman Sellers, and Sophonisba Peale, his daughter by his first wife. So all of these people, details from the life of these people, help to establish the time in which these were created. Eleanor de Peyster Peale, the second wife of Charles, you see here, died in childbirth in February 1804. and it provides a sharp terminus, of course, for her profile likeness. Um, the the thing that is really quite amazing about this profile, as you can see, is it has a kind of decorative, wonderful sensibility to it. It's not a simple, simply cut thing. It's worked on, it's worked over, and its details of her physiognomy are carefully delineated, along with making much of this bonnet that she has on. So it becomes more than something very flat and uninteresting. I always tend to think this is such an amazing profile with such a particular likeness of a person that you sort of begin to know her better. And Moses must have looked at her very hard. Perhaps he had a particular interest or affection for her. We don't know. But these are very interesting. And here, of course, is Charles Willson Peale's profile. Certainly a strong kind of likeness that you can intuit what he looks like, but not quite as spectacular as the one that he did of Eleanor. And then there was his third wife, who he marries in 1804, Elizabeth Sellers. She was brought to the museum by her cousin, who was the mother of Coleman Sellers, who became Charles's son-in-law. And she had her profile cut by Moses. And when Moses was done, it was taken to Charles Willson Peale. It was taken to her friend, her cousin, and who liked it and then showed it to Peale. And Peale said, "Oh my, she looks like a woman with a sweet disposition." And this was sort of he subscribed more or less to the Lavater's studies in physiognomy that were very, very popular at the time. And there were even these pocket Lavaters that you could take with you, which showed this clergymen and philosophers' writings and illustrations of what a profile told you about a person's possible character. So this was not about like public performance, how you dress, how your manners were. This was about sort of the hard facts of what your physiognomy looked like. And of course, we think about it in very sort of negative terms now, but it was a very popular thing that you could somehow intuit something about a person's personality. Anyway, Peale believed she had a sweet disposition. They married in 1805, and they did have a happy marriage. Just to talk a little bit more about the specificity of Moses' profiles, we have in the middle here Coleman Sellers, we have on the right Raphael Peale, and on the left Rubens Peale. These you can see are all record a very specific likeness, but also I feel that very often in Moses' best works we can sense a sense of projection of personality about that. And so they are really fun to look at. They're not a quick look. You can sort of dwell on them a bit and think about them. And there's the library company as well as has a very, very large collection of profiles by Moses. And these two are from the library company collection, and they're particularly interesting because they're annotated. And this was one of the things that Charles Willson Peale asked Moses to do, to sort of keep track of people's names and numbers and so forth. On the far side here, you can see, oh, sorry. Mm. On the far side here, you can see there's a number, so something had to do with number 140 or 42 or something. But she's also has her name written down, which may or may not be spelled properly. We don't know. There's a museum stamp, which is the earliest of the Peale Museum stamps underneath her, and just sort of a wonderful likeness of this woman. The Mr. Granberry is really very interesting because it says that Mr. Gill is going to call for his profiles and they're going to be framed. So this tells us a little bit about the practice of the profile cutting. And someone might go and have their profile taken, but they might order several for family members. Apparently, they also would have them the possibility of having them framed at the museum. So we begin to get a sense of production out of little annotations like this that Moses was asked to make by Peale. And then again, we have from the collection of the library company, we have a really an amazing diversity of personalities and individuals that appear. And so these, I just show you these two as both being extremely wonderfully done and evocative examples of Moses' work. So just to say that there's a selection of profiles by Moses up in the Logan Room at the Library Company of Philadelphia. And there is always a selection of profiles by Moses, which I have on display in the Peale Gallery at the Philadelphia Art Museum. These are cycled through throughout the season, throughout the year, but there is always a dedicated space for his work. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Carol. That was wonderful. Um, I am looking at the Q&A right now, and so far everyone is being shy. So please start typing in your questions or comments for Carol. We have a few minutes. And I guess in the meantime, I'll ask a question, Carol, that might be a question that you can defer to Lauren later on. But you mentioned that Moses had specialized scissors. Where did he get the scissors from?
I do not know, but I think Lauren would have some
Okay.
idea. But these had to be extremely, um, sharp and special. And they would probably be something like, I don't want to say they were sewing scissors, but something that was used for very, very fine work of some sort so that you could really manipulate them easily in this. This is a very small range of motion that's going on here
Mhm.
in terms of the actual shaping of these profiles.
Okay, thank you. Um, we have a question or a comment that says, please tell us more about the Peel Museum stamps.
Oh, okay. All right. That Peale Museum stamp that I pointed out is the early museum stamp. It goes on for maybe decades. But then there's another stamp which appears, which has an eagle on it and a flag. My theory, and this is only a theory, is that perhaps when the Peale Museum moves to the arcade in the 1820s, that's when a new stamp appears because the setup changed. And that's one possibility. Also, it might have been decided to sort of upgrade it, make it look a little bit different. And there are other suggestions that it might have something to do with the Baltimore Museum, but we don't really know that. I don't. It's a big conundrum. It's waiting for someone to jump in and figure out. What we do know for sure is what the first museum stamp looked like. And we know that there's so many that have the eagle on them, that it was something that was certainly created at a Peale museum, whether it was Philadelphia or Baltimore or New York. Rubens Peale started a museum in New York in 1825. So there was also profile cutting going on there.
Okay. We have a question. Do you know the identities of the subjects in the penultimate slide?
In the which slide? I'm
Penultimate, which I guess is that the second to the last or is that the last slide?
I don't know what they're really referring to in penultimate.
It's the last slide, and I believe they were
Oh, okay.
unidentified, but I'm not sure off the top of
Oh,
my
no,
head.
I do not know. The
Yeah.
gentleman with the high collar, the African American gentleman, we don't know. And there are a fair number of African American sitters in the library company collection, as you know, which is such a deep collection, and as might be possible, it may have come out of the sale of the Peale Museum in 1854, where there were so many profiles left. They were what Peale referred to as blockheads. They were the simple, they were the inverse of what you see in the cut paper profile. They were what came out. And so there was probably a lot of things there that may have come that way, but we don't know the provenance of that. But it's interesting, and the library company collection is great because it gives you this enormous diversity of people in it because it's very large. You know how many pieces are in there.
Yes, there's a lot.
A lot.
We have a question. Are all the profiles the same overall size in terms of dimensions?
Yes, and that's because they're generated out of the same kind of device. They're not, if they're larger, they're really coming probably from another device and cut by someone else, probably most probably. Not to say Moses never cut a larger profile. We have no idea. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't use that physiognotrace, but another one. All these things are questions to be answered.
The next question might be one that Lauren will end up answering, but I will throw it out to you, Carol, since it's in the chat or the Q&A. Can you provide more details on the black versus the blue portraits? And I assume they're talking about the background paper.
Right. So what you always have to realize when you see these is that you're looking into a void. In other words, what's in back of this, this is not a black profile. This is a white profile, very delicately cut out, that is then placed against a piece of black paper or a piece of blue paper. It's believed at present that the blue paper is probably more original than the black, but we don't really know. And again, here's another place for people to do research about, what kind of papers were used. And this would have been actually a function of taking your profile home and putting it in an album, because once you put it in an album, it was going to be against a piece of paper of a certain color. And that's what gives these things. And the hollow cut, and Lauren will talk about this, is what is so difficult. And what you have to appreciate about Moses' delicacy of cutting and evocation of character in these is that this is an inverse of what you would do. It's more natural to think of how you'd cut around something to create shapes, but this is the internal part is taken out, and what you have left is the external part, and that's where the color and the comes from, whatever it's set against.
Thank you, Carol. There are so many good questions that are coming in, but I am afraid that if I keep reading them out, we're going to be far, far behind by the time we get to the third or fourth or
Okay.
fifth speaker. So I'm hoping that some of these questions will I'll try to circle around back to at the end of everyone's presentation, or some of the questions may be answered in some of the other presentations. So it's nothing against any of your questions that didn't get read out loud. We simply are going to run out of time. So having said that, I will thank Carol one more time and introduce our next speaker. And the next presentation will be by Dr. Nancy Proctor, who is director of the lab at the Peale, Baltimore's Community Museum. Her presentation is entitled Moses Williams, Cutter of Profiles, a permanent exhibit at the Peale, Baltimore's Community Museum.
Hello, thank you very much for that. Let me try to share my slides here. And just a small correction, I was the refounding director of the Peale Museum in Baltimore. I handed over that role to John Swow in January of this year, and I am now serving as executive director of the Parkway Theater in Baltimore, which is the home of the Maryland Film Festival, another but very different historic building in the heart of downtown. But what I want to talk about today is the exhibit that we put up at the Peale. which again is Baltimore's community museum. So this is not the Philadelphia Museum of the past, present or future, I suppose. It is instead the first purpose-built museum in the Americas, and indeed only the fourth museum ever built anywhere in the world. And so it was founded by Rembrandt Peale. The architect was Robert Carey Long Sr., who was the first professional architect in the state of Maryland. And it looks like what you see on the screen here now and behind me. It's essentially a federal style townhouse with enlarged galleries and an annex on back that provided both a very large picture gallery, and eventually when Rubens Peale took over running this museum in 1822, it became the menagerie, this annex on the back with live animals. But today, the Peale is, as I said, Baltimore's community museum. The building has had many lives. It was abandoned for 20 years from 1997 until 2017, when I was brought on board to help give it a new purpose and lead the capital campaign to save the building. And there is no physical collection. So we decided to take a very different approach to being a museum, one based not on collections of physical things, but rather on an archive of digitally recorded stories of the city of Baltimore, and also to present this historic building as a platform both to amplify those voices and stories and to serve as a space for artistic, scientific, and cultural projects that are created by community members in Baltimore. And really, our hope is to use this opportunity as both a very old and a very new museum to try new things and really innovate on what a museum can be and the different ways that it can be community driven as opposed to top down driven, as has been the tendency since, say, the mid 19th century. Our three principal activities at the Peale today are to serve as a home for Baltimore stories in all media, from our digital archives to live performances, exhibitions, workshops, etc. To serve as a teaching museum. We host a preservation trades pre-apprenticeship program, and to serve as a laboratory for cultural practice. Both experimenting with new ways of being a museum and developing exhibitions and working with communities, but also incubating other new cultural organizations and museums. And I like to think that this is in the spirit of the Peales, who were such pioneers in museum practice. So of course, as I mentioned, it was founded by Rembrandt Peale. This is his self-portrait from the DIA from 1828, just a couple of years before Rubens Peale, who was at that time by then running the museum, and Rembrandt were kind of forced to sell the building in a bit of a fire sale by their investors, who had never been fully paid back for the money that had been borrowed to build the museum. And of course, the work that Rubens and Rembrandt did in the Baltimore Museum was very much inspired by and informed by their time learning and working in the Philadelphia Museum, which of course you'll all recognize here from this self-portrait by Charles Willson Peale. Now, there was another person, as we've learned, who was very instrumental in running the Philadelphia Museum, and that was Moses Williams. I want to hasten to add that we so far have no evidence that Moses Williams ever worked at the Baltimore Museum or even visited there. That's a wonderful area for research, and I'd be delighted to hear if anybody finds otherwise. Certainly, Charles Willson Peale and others from the Peale family made numerous trips to Baltimore. And of course, the daughter, Angelica Kaufman Peale, married into a Baltimore-based family. But as far as we know, Moses Williams never set foot in the building that now hosts his exhibition. So you've already had a wonderful presentation from Carol about the extensive collection of silhouettes held at the Philadelphia Museum of Art and the challenges of attributing them to Moses Williams or other cutters. What we really wanted to do at the Peale in Baltimore, again, without the benefit of such wonderful collections of silhouettes or indeed original Peale paintings, was to nonetheless tell the story of Moses Williams and make sure that it had a place in this museum in Baltimore, which is so dedicated to amplifying voices and stories that are too little heard or often unknown because they've been overlooked or even deliberately erased in history. And in a moment, I'll talk about why that has a particular resonance for our communities in Baltimore and our work with them. But before I go into that, I want to just show you a little video that will illustrate what this experience is like to visit the permanent exhibit about Moses Williams at the Peale in Baltimore. Let me turn down that volume. So when you walk in the front door, you find our front lobby. You're greeted by the wonderful Daisy Brown, our front of house manager, whom you glimpsed there. To the right, we have a gallery that we call the Peale Gallery. We provide audio tours and Braille interpretation and other accessibility affordances throughout. The painting here is, of course, a replica. It's from an exhibit that was at the Peale Museum back in the 1990s. And because it's a replica, our visitors can interact with it and put words in Charles Willson Peale's mouth. This is a replica physiognotrace developed for us by the studio of McLean Wiesand in Baltimore. It is a working physiognotrace that Lauren Muni has used. We have over here a replica of the portrait of the, quote, Hawaiian chieftain that's in the Bishop collection, which Dr. Ellen Fernandez Sacco has, I think, very convincingly argued the sitter for that was probably Moses Williams. The other Peale paintings that you've seen here are also replicas. The exhibit includes text telling the story about Moses Williams' work, written by Ron Kipling Williams, our writer, and that's a quote in his comment on the no relation, by the way, as far as we know. The bulk of the exhibit includes texts with Braille versions, and you can either use the light on your phone or a pen light, which are provided free of charge, that you use to shine underneath a silhouette, what we call a shadow sign. This was developed by Michael Burns from Quatrefoil Associates, our neighborhood, our local exhibit developers, as a way, a very low cost but still highly interactive way for people to kind of activate silhouettes or shadow images and kind of experience the kind of work that Moses Williams would have been engaged in. In this gallery, and I'll just let this roll for a minute, even though we've technically left the gallery where the Moses Williams exhibit is, still integrates with the Moses Williams exhibit and kind of one flows naturally into the other. This is called Founding Fossils. It was developed by Dr. Cheryl Fogle Hatch, a Baltimore-based archaeologist who is also blind, in partnership with Dr. Bernard Means from Virginia Commonwealth University. He had been scanning the mastodon skeletons, both in Germany and in the US, that had been originally exhibited in the Peale's museums. One was exhibited in Philadelphia, one in the Baltimore Museum, and they were, of course, major attractions in both. And these scans were then 3D printed so that they could be touched and therefore accessible to people who might not be able to see them otherwise. And this is just a little exhibit about the gaslight technology that Rembrandt Peale introduced to his museum so that he could essentially keep the galleries open after dark and sell more tickets. And it turned out to be quite an attractive exhibit in its own right because Gaslight was brand new and people were quite amazed to see how bright it could be. So that is a very a lightning fast tour through really two exhibits there, the Moses Williams exhibit and the Founding Fossils exhibit. And having heard Carol's talk, you'll understand why that it is so appropriate to talk about Moses Williams in the context of telling the history of the mastodon. And indeed, a real priority for us has been making sure that both of those stories are available and accessible to people of all abilities at the Peale Museum in Baltimore. This gallery here is what we have named the Moses Williams Center. And we've done so admittedly at risk of confusing people and making them think that Moses Williams worked in Baltimore, which again, I'm going to say again, we do not know that he did. But the reason why his story is so very resonant for us and why we went as far as to name our teaching gallery after it is because, of course, he was like our apprentices in the Guild, which is our historic preservation trades program, a young Black man born into a situation of great disadvantage in many respects, and yet great talent, great entrepreneurial spirit, and great ability. And he managed to make a way out of no way. And our apprenticeship program is really aimed at people who find themselves in similar circumstances in their origins, and they're learning the historic preservation trades, which is something, an amazing field with a dearth of people coming into it. And yet it offers a very nice living wage for creative, meaningful work. And it doesn't require a college degree, which can, of course, be out of reach for many people who are coming from financial disadvantage. So in the photo on the left, you see the founder of the program, the artist and curator Jeffrey Kent, with our first cohort who started work in 2021 when the Peale Museum building in Baltimore was still under renovation, and they actually helped with the renovation of this gallery that you then see pictured from the interior on the left. And you see also our last cohort of apprentices installing an exhibit in that room. So that is really the very quick introduction to the Moses Williams exhibit at the Peale in Baltimore. As I mentioned, I am no longer permanently, I'm no longer on staff at the Peale, though I will always be part of the Peale family and community, and am always happy to talk about all things Peale. But you can find me at my new email address, nancy@mdfilmfest.com. Please also, if you're interested in following up, note the email addresses of the Peale's new director, John Swow, Andy Townsend, who is in charge of programs, including the Guild pre-apprenticeship program, and Lexi Tyson, who is in charge of project management, and in fact project managed the installation of the exhibit on Moses Williams, among others, at the Peale in Baltimore. I will conclude by just thanking the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority, who provided the grant that made that exhibit possible, and also Dean Krimmel, who was the incredible historian who worked on a whole timeline of the history of the Peale Museum in Baltimore, which led to our finding out quite a few things about Moses Williams that I certainly didn't know before. I don't want to steal his thunder at all, so I won't say any more on that topic, but I am very open to any questions or continuing the conversation.
Thank you, Nancy. That was great. And I do apologize that I got your incorrect employer. But
Well,
thank you
it
for.
changed. It's okay. It changed in the process of this all being developed, so no worries.
And again, if folks would like to put questions and comments into the Q&A, I do see one here that relates to you, Nancy, and this person is asking, how does the Peale Museum design compare to that of the Sloane Museum in London?
Oh, that's a great question. I have not, although I've been to the Zone in London, I have never gone there with that question in mind, so I'm not prepared to answer it, but I'll make a note of that and I'd love to find out myself.
Okay. Um, who did the sculpture relief on the facade?
That's another good question. I'm not sure if Dean actually recalls. It is a much later piece that was not from Rembrandt Peale's period. In fact, I think it's even early 20th century, and Dean again might be able to correct me. He was actually a curator at the Peale in its second run as a museum, which started in 1930 and ended with the museum being shuttered in 1997, and its collection was transferred to the Maryland Historical Society, as it was called then. So, um,
I
but
can answer that if you want. I can throw a little bit of light onto that.
thank you.
It was done after, it was installed during the reconstruction of the Peel in 1930, and it was, I'm pretty sure it was the work of a man named R. McGill Mackle, who was also a muralist. So it was commissioned for that space, which was empty at the time. I think at one point it used to say City Hall, and at one point it said Rembrandt Peale's Museum. So it was installed by with the with money paid by the local utility, which has been a long time sugar daddy of the Peel. Since the gaslighting days, right, Nancy? So, yeah, it's very much the 1930s Peel that we see today, that you see in the picture.
And in fact, Rembrandt Peale really founded what we call today BGE, Baltimore Gas and Electric. But of course, when he founded it, it was called the Baltimore Gas and Light Company. And that was a direct result of everybody being very excited by the gas-powered chandeliers in the museum. And the city asked him to create a gas-powered streetlight network in the city. So that's why there's a connection between that utility and the museum. It was really born in the building that you see behind me.
We have a person asking, are there any Peale descendants that are involved in the Peale currently?
Yes, indeed. We have, let's see, one Peale descendant currently on the board, Steve Howard. We have one Peale descendant who's a board member emeritus, Mortimer or Tim Sellers. And then another Peale descendant who's been an invaluable colleague and advisor, Dr. Heather Ewing, who is based between Italy and New York as the director of Civitella, the artist residency program. There are also many other Peale descendants who have, been in close touch throughout the renovation, authors and artists of all sorts. So the creativity continues.
Is the video that you included in your presentation available online?
Well, not at the moment, but it will be as soon as you post this recording. And I'm happy to share it. I will mention it's from a few months ago. Oh, you know what? I realized one thing I didn't mention is the plan is actually to move the exhibit and expand it into the Moses Williams Center, so that larger gallery space. So that'll be happening, I believe, next year under the leadership of John Swell.
So it doesn't exist as a separate video online anywhere, is that?
Not at the moment,
Okay.
but it'll be part of this. And if anybody wants it, they're welcome to contact me. I'm happy to share it.
Thanks. Um, when were the gas lights installed at the Peale?
So 1816 was the date, February, in fact, was the date of the first uh, gas street lamp installation. And so Rembrandt Peale was using the chandeliers before then in the museum. So he got started on it pretty quickly. The museum opened in 1814, August 15th. And so it was in that intervening period. And there had been experiments with gas-powered lights, even street lights before that in London, and I believe Buffalo had installed one. But Baltimore is called Light City today in part as a tribute to the fact that it was the first city in America to be lit by gas-powered street lamps.
And I will read out a comment, which is actually, I believe, was typed during the last presentation, but it's just, I think, general information that will be of interest to everyone. It may be worth noting that the Peale Museum with Eagle stamp survived and was used by someone in the early 20th century to create fakes. So keep that as a word of warning.
Caveat emptor, yeah.
Yes. Are there any other questions for Nancy? Okay, then thank you very much,
Thank
Nancy.
you.
And I will introduce our next presenter, who is Dr. Ellen Fernandez Sacco, a genealogist and independent scholar. Her presentation this afternoon is entitled Not Yet Completely Free: The Context of Gradual Emancipation and the Family of Moses Williams, Philadelphia, 1776 to 1830.
Okay. Can you see that? Okay. All right.
It looks good. It looks
Okay.
good, Ellen.
Okay, thank you. Every mind, many think of the U.S. South rather than the northern states. One of the most effective ways to understand the little-known history of northern slavery is through a case study of the Williams family. Their story directly addresses the reality of bondage in places like Philadelphia, a city closely identified with national freedom. Although many people associate slavery only with the U.S. South, it persisted in northern states, particularly those with gradual emancipation laws, such as Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New York, and New Jersey. The history of the Williams family highlights how slavery challenges the images of Philadelphia, which in the 1790s was the political, economic, and intellectual center of the nascent United States and home to a rapidly growing free Black community that generated crucial networks for support and spaces for renewal before the 1830s. I'm a genealogist and independent scholar focused on Afro-Indigenous and African-descended families making the transition to freedom, and I facilitate that access by helping people understand their links to enslavers and the enslaved. Much of my work focuses on Puerto Rico and the connections to the southern states. This project is tied to earlier work on museums in the early republic, collection formation and displays, and for the Peale Museum that involved the life and family of Moses Williams. The article, Not Yet Completely Free, was awarded the Phyllis Wheatley Award this year by the Sons and Daughters of the U.S. Middle Passage, and there's a PDF available on my academia.u page for download. I'm going to focus on three elements in this presentation: Moses Williams and his family, indenture as a response and a strategy to navigate the difficult economy of Philadelphia, and the process of reconstructing the family. And they're just a lot of different collections, a lot of pieces of different collections that went into this work. Maintaining a focus on Williams family members helps to recenter them, since most of the scant archival data on Moses Williams is drawn from the archives of Charles Willson Peale, portrait painter, museum owner, and enslaver of Williams and his parents. Basically, the terms of Williams' indenture ended. He gained his freedom about 1802 and 1803 and worked at the museum as an attendant and skilled profile cutter. He was adept at playing the violin and other musical instruments, was literate, and likely performed a range of tasks at the museum involving the collections. He was one of 7 children of John and Phyllis Williams. Peale's self-portrait commemorates his labors at the Philadelphia Museum, known as Peale's Museum. He was also the former enslaver for Williams and his family between 1776 and 1802. And he held Williams' parents in bondage for a decade. And Williams was enslaved and indentured until he reached the age of 28. And this just shows the area that he was working in the State House from 1802 until into the 20s. After Williams was emancipated by 1803, Peale set him up as a profile cutter at the museum as his means of support, according to the terms of the Emancipation Act of 1780. And I find a certain irony in that the corner where Williams worked is effectively erased by depicting the space of the mastodon behind Peale that was on the other side of the building where he stands. So August 1776 in Philadelphia, Peale was an officer and moved his family north from Anne Arundel County to Charlestown, Maryland, and then to Philadelphia over the course of 3 years as the Revolutionary War expanded. His parents, who began as Scarborough and Lucy, changed their names in 1786 when Peale gave John Williams his freedom and Phyllis a note to raise funds for her freedom that year. In 1802, he created a niche for Moses that was a part for his sons, who were fine artists. The painting is from about 1795 to about 1800, and this is part of a pair that Charles Willson's son Rembrandt Peale painted that combined an accurate record of artifacts with a person, a kind of scientific portraiture. Identified the sitter as Moses Williams based on the research and the fact that there were no Pacific Islanders who were sitting for portraits in Philadelphia at the time. In 1802, Williams became an advertising prop when Peale sent him out dressed as a Shawnee Indian on horseback to hand out flyers for the Mastodon exhibit. He was a highly skilled worker. He lived with the Peales until his emancipation, and he entered into a relationship with Peale's cook, Maria. He experienced an unusual degree of success for a time, having 5 children and owning a house and property not far from the museum. I just want to briefly mention that the origin for the Williams family is likely in Maryland and tied to the Brewer family, who owned the Larkington plantation. Paul Hynek's Free African Americans of Maryland and Delaware has transcriptions of court cases that mention Rachel Brewer Peale's brother, and that he had a servant brought to court named Sarah Williams for having a mulatto child. Sarah Williams is also the name of the daughter of the Negro planter Guy Williams. Another daughter of Guy Williams, Catherine, had 2 sons named John and Moses Williams. Naming patterns suggest that this is more than a coincidence, and also John and Phyllis named 2 children, Charles and James, for Charles Willson and his brother James Peale. The Williams family and the rest of the Black community lived under the pressure of 2 laws that impacted them well after their passage: the 1780 Act for the Gradual Abolition for Slavery and the Fugitive Slave Law of 1793. And under the terms of the 1780 Gradual Emancipation Act, Williams and his siblings were eligible for freedom after reaching the age of 28, in contrast to the 4-year indentures for servants. The 1793 Fugitive Slave Law brought pain to many and made slavery a national institution, as enslavers were able to arrest anyone they suspected was enslaved, no matter the state, no matter the territory. This was an amendment to the Constitution that Washington himself approved, and by 1800, this situation affected the Williams family directly. This law put the self-emancipated at risk for recapture for the rest of their lives, but some enslavers did not think that it was strong enough. It also classified children born to fugitive slave mothers as slaves and the property of their mother's master for the rest of their lives. The section on the upper right specifies a $500 fine and a year of imprisonment for anyone interfering with the process of arrest and arraignment before any judge. There was no jury, however flimsy the evidence. Their reach had no limit and classified enslaved status as permanent. And there were a lot of kidnapping rings in Philadelphia that were depending on the law in order to pull people off the street and sell them south. Given the 1780 law and its stipulations, I was expecting to find records of Moses Williams, so I began with Peale's tax records. This chart just collects the tax information on Peale to follow mention of enslaved persons, and basically between 1785 and 1802, Peale was paying taxes on one enslaved person, who is Moses Williams, and 1802 was the last year he was claimed. This helps to establish that his parents were free as they weren't claimed on his taxes, together with this 1786, 1800 indenture, EAS indenture. So my search for Moses Williams' manumission papers began with the Pennsylvania Abolition Society papers at the HSP, the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, which turned out to offer the most detail about the family. So this document is the October 25th, 1786 manumission for John Williams Jr., which is a reinscription of the original Freedom document. And that speaks to the urgency of doing this, given the terms of the 1793 Fugitive Slave Act. So the document was entered on the 28th of March, 1800, when John Williams Jr. was, quote, lately rescued from impending slavery. Peale appeared before Mayor Robert Wharton on the 28th of March, 1800, to verify the 1786 manumission as his act and deed. So then again, indirectly, this document confirms that John and Phyllis Williams were free by this date, as Peale is returning their son to them for his care. So charting out the indentures, you really start to get a sense of the continuing difficulties for the Williams family. You want to note that repetition and that Charles Williams, at the age of 2, and then again at the age of 8, he binds himself out for a second time for over a year in 1810. His brothers were indentured to be trained in tanning and harness making. And then this 1774 print from the Art of Carriage and Saddle Making offers an idea of the task and saddlery that they worked in. William Jones, by 1805, has his own saddlery listed in the directory on 78 Chestnut Street, so the location may have been close enough for the family to stay in contact over the course of the indenture. And just weeks after John Williams' marriage to Phyllis in March 1802, things were not going well. This is demonstrated by the fact that John Williams brought 2 children to be indentured in April 1802, Charles for a second time, and that X that he signs his name is done with a very shaky hand. April 1802 is the same month that Moses and Maria's first child, Eliza Williams, was born, and this also lends a sense of urgency to the arrangement that Peale made for Williams with the physiognotrace of this year. And this is an 1807 indenture for 4 years and 6 months for Phyllis Williams, which fits time-wise within the cluster of the PAS indentures for her children. So what the PAS papers enabled me to do was then to locate the christenings for their other children in the parish records in the digitized Philadelphia congregation site. So we have the marriage of John Williams and Phyllis Jackson by Reverend Pillmore at the bottom at Old St. Paul's Church, Hannah Williams' christening at Christ Church in 1793, and Catherine Williams' baptism record at Christ Church in 1790. So when you pull the parish records together, one can better see the efforts taken and the delays involved in the timing of these events. The first 9 entries relate to his parents, and below that are Moses and Maria Williams' children. And this begins to suggest what it takes to keep a family together, and that John and Phyllis Williams basically waited 26 years to make their marriage official. Also note they attended 3 different churches, while Moses and Maria's children were christened at the First Reformed Church. I found no marriage record located there for them in their archives. Moses is buried as a stranger in the St. George Methodist Episcopal Burial Ground, and the lot belonged to the same church that Richard Allen, Absalom Jones, and the Black members of the congregation rose and left to establish their own churches decades earlier in 1780. Of image, 3 generations of William's family emerges with 7 siblings and his 5 children with Maria. They may be descendants from his last siblings, Hannah and Charles, and his children. The reason we're all here today is to extend the cultural memory of Moses Williams and his family. This offers the possibility of new questions and new meanings for their lives and the potential connection to descendants today. Through this case study, we better understand the fragility of legal status as an unfree person waiting for the term of indenture, which is shortened to 28 years from 31 years, to end. And by stitching together the family history of Moses Williams, born in Philadelphia in 1776, we gain a view of the nation's founding. We glimpse members of the early Black community and better understand the love, strength, and resilience required to endure their circumstances. The United States, as a nation, is shaped by struggles with unfreedom, as experienced by families like the Williamses before the 1838 census. In these times, we need to call their names. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellen. That was great.
Video was I couldn't undo it. Yeah, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, we have a question and comment. I understand that earlier scholarship puts Moses Williams' birthday as circa 1775. Could you discuss the evidence for the new dating of his birthday to August 1776? Is this documented in the selected papers or the collected papers of Charles Willson Peale?
It's more an inference reading between the lines of the birth dates of his children, the Pilkingtons, where the Peales had recorded their the birth of the family. Unfortunately, the sections where Moses and his other family members would have been listed are all carefully scissored out of there, so that doesn't exist. In 1775, they were not in Philadelphia. I believe they were in Annapolis, but there's no, going over it and over it, it's the only thing I could come up with is that it's more August 1776.
Were you able to find whether any of Moses' children were artists like their father?
No, and it's incredibly difficult. Some of the names are very similar. Williams is not a rare surname, so that makes it rather difficult. I am still searching for more. I mean, they still look for more information on them. He did have a grandchild that died very young. I mean, thanks to Dean Krimmel for finding that information out and for finding the probate that filled in a couple of extra children. But there's really not a lot of information about the children available per se.
Can you clarify the relationship between Moses Williams and the 1780 Act? It sounds like Moses Williams was born in 1776, but the Gradual Emancipation Act only applied to children born after 1780 to enslaved mothers. Are you saying that Charles Willson Peale chose to apply the principles of the law to Williams, even though he was not legally subject to it?
I believe that's the case. There would have been a book of manumissions that was at the courthouse that would have been that was entered, but that book is no longer extant. I tried to find sources to find out where that would have been recorded because it seems like it would be pretty important to be able to have a copy of Freedom Papers someplace to in case you had to establish that you were free. So no.
Could you please clarify how you define the terms indenture versus slavery here?
It's still you cannot walk away from an indenture. You're unfree. You're not free until that term is over. So basically what the law did was to set up is kind of to formalize a situation where you would have somebody working towards emancipation for until they reach the age of 28. It's not unusual. If you look at Maryland, I believe the age of indenture, people became free at 31. Um, but it's not like you have entirely control over your own life until the term of that indenture is ended. So it's not that different than being enslaved. You're still enslaved. It's just that that term hasn't ended. The later children would have been born, if they're born, John Williams Jr. was not born free. I believe some of his siblings may have been born free, but there's no, but the terms of indenture for Moses involved slavery. He was enslaved until 1802. I think it's a little bit of a gray area. He's born before it. It's a law that Peale had voted for himself, so he would have been very familiar with the terms. In order for people to be free, you had to pay a certain amount. I don't remember the amount right now off the top of my head, but you had to pay a bond as a guarantee that this person would not be on a public dole. You know, that's not what they wanted to happen when people's terms of enslavement ended.
And this person's comment relates to what we were just discussing. He writes, I should note that if Moses Williams was born in 1775, 1776, he was living in Pennsylvania before 1780, then he was not owed his freedom at the age of 28. If Williams did receive his freedom in 1803, then Peale would have elected to free him. And this person follows up with the Philadelphia County slave registries have not survived. Extant copies are almost entirely contained within I think this is Philadelphia Abolitionist or Pennsylvania Abolition Society records.
Yeah, I went through a lot of that just trying to see what else I could glean on Williams, and there's nothing on him in there. But that's how I found the rest of his family, which I thought in of itself was remarkable because he had been painted out as this one person in the museum, but then I really wanted to know more about the possibility of family for him. And that's what the PAS papers were able to provide.
We have a comment. I think it's still so visceral and challenging to hear descriptions of enslavement in economic terms at the intersection of the real lives of individuals like Moses Williams. I felt particularly impacted hearing of how taxes were paid on enslaved individuals. And that raises just something that I made a note of that I noticed on the slide you had, I think in 1801, Moses Williams' taxes, it was listed as $50, and then in 1802 it was $100. And I was wondering, what made that big leap in the value.
I think it's because it cost more to have enslaved people. I think the value of enslavement went up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a market, and they're on the edge of the South. I mean, you have a lot of people coming in and out of the city with enslaved people. And that whole like 6 months you stay, and if you leave Washington, that a bunch of times, with Oney Judge, why Oney Judge finally left. But yeah.
We have time for a couple more questions or comments, or we can move on to our next speaker. So I'll just... Okay. Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you.
Okay. Our next speaker is Dean Krimmel, who we heard from briefly in response to a question. He is a public historian and research consultant to the Peale, Baltimore's Community Museum, And his presentation this afternoon is entitled Locating Moses Williams in Philadelphia.
Sarah, you want to enable my video?
Grace, you'll need to do that.
I don't want to be behind the darkness. Oh, thanks very much. I have to start by saying I should have been higher up on this order, I think. I have all these reveals, and I think they've been revealed. So I'm going to jump in. My piece of this, locating Moses Williams in Philadelphia, is it's a story of 2 days I spent in Philadelphia doing research at City Hall, the Register of Wills office, and the Philadelphia City Archives. It was a cold January weekend or weekdays in 2025. But the backstory is that I had been working with Nancy and the Peale folks, I don't know, for about 18 months. And I'd come in innocently to do some fact checking on the exhibit. I knew of Moses Williams, my years at the Peale, very little about him. And when I started to do my work, I was surprised and looking at the scholarship, how little we really knew about this person, the details of his life. And I think I was probably also secretly thrilled. Ooh, good, great. I can actually make a contribution and find some things out, which everybody who does research wants to do. So I started to dig into sources, the usual sources that we use in public history and urban history and social history, city directories, newspapers, census records, vital records, so much of the things that Ellen has used and shown you. I ultimately tried to pull together everything that we could possibly know about Moses Williams and then the Peales and the family and their connection. I think my timeline is about 140 pages long, and it's full of dead ends and loose ends and possibilities. Along the way, I did meet Ellen, and found out that I probably was reinventing the wheel to some extent. And also, she knew a hell of a lot more than I did about many things. But I nonetheless, we persisted and put together some things and shared theories. And then in the fall of 2024, I contacted the Register of Wills office, and I have a slide up here that is about the probate records. Because in the back of my mind, I said, there's a lot we can do online. And I was doing all this armchair work, which, of course, all of us who were older could never imagine having been able to do decades ago. But there's certain things you have to go to the archives for. So probate was one. I'm going to talk today about the probate. I did find some things in the city archives as well. But today it's about the probate. So, and it's about understanding and kind of deciphering and sharing, I should say, what I learned and what we now know based on these records. So what are probate records? They're, as you can see, they're official documents. They're legal documents. It's a whole legal process once somebody has passed away. We all probably go through it in our own lives. Some people leave a last will and testament, others do not. There are letters of administration to an executor of an estate if you leave a will, or to an administrator if you die without a will, which is called intestate. There's estate inventories done, usually when someone dies without a will. It's sometimes happens otherwise. There are also various administration records and accounts by the people who execute the estate or administer the estate in our case. So with that, I contacted the Register of Wills office, got a couple leads back, and thought, well, there are possibilities. The dates didn't quite jive, but there were people named Moses Williams, and as Ellen has alluded to, there's so many. It's not that common of a name, but they're just enough for us to have chased down leads and hit dead ends. So I wasn't entirely optimistic, but I did know I could probably find some things at the city archives. So I arrive at the city hall, the register of Will's office, and there's a young lady who shows me a file. I open it up. It's got a handful of papers in it, and I utter those words. Deja, her name is Deja Cosby. I corresponded with her. I said, Deja, you're not part of the Moses Williams story. So I said, as my grandmother would, I said, God love you. Most clerks, when confronted with queries about historical records, especially 200 plus years old, kind of look at you sideways or wonder about things. Deja Cosby was good enough to hold on to it, allowing me to get to Philadelphia, and then handed it over. So there it was. But was it the right person, or why should I say she's entering the story? And that was because what we see here is the second page of an estate inventory. And as I'm going down, is this our Moses Williams? Is this it? And I see profile machine. You see it in the middle of the page, one profile machine. And this is the inventory made. And I'll talk about this. I'll show you all the papers after as we move forward. But the valuation is made in January 6, 1831. At that point, I said to myself, this is Moses. What else will we learn? The file had these pieces of paper in it, these accounts, inventory, other records that I will go over individually. I'll explain what they are and show you what they have in them. So what did we learn? Well, most of you folks have already learned this from my co-presenters. So we did not know Moses Williams' death date. So the probate record told us that. We knew, I said 4 of his children. There are 4 of his children mentioned in this. Ellen and I are going back and forth about the other 2, whether or not they are children or name changes. So there's an ongoing conversation. We learned a little bit about his possessions through the inventory. We learned a kind of a minor point about who was supplying frames for profiles, at least at the end of Moses's life. And then I also say more with further research because I don't know. The metaphors are one door opens, doors are opening or we're connecting dots all over the place. And one thing leads to another in this kind of research. So, and then indirectly, what I learned, and then what we learned based on the probate in reinterpreting other sources was where Moses was buried. And the name of the name of somebody who was likely a granddaughter. Occupation of his son Charles, who was a carpenter, and that is something I found in the city archives later, based on knowing a name. And then again, there's undoubtedly more with further research. There's again connecting dots, opening doors. So let me go in. I'm going to go in detail into each of the documents themselves. Moses Williams died on December 18, 1830. How do we know it? It's specified. What we don't know, we did not learn this through burial records, because there are gaps in burial records in Philadelphia. You get onto the screen with a microfilm version of burial records, and there's gaps. It just so turns out Moses Williams died in one of those gaps in the surviving records. So this is an affidavit, as it were, signed by Louisa Williams and her sister Sarah Weaver. And I'll talk about this in a moment, but it literally says, it states that our father, Mr. Moses Williams, died, deceased the 18th of December, 1830. Case closed. It was a eureka moment. Okay, we have a date. In fact, the city directories show Moses listed until 1833, and I'd always wondered if he even lived on past that. The children's names. The document on the left, it's a detail from that affidavit. It's Louisa, it's Sarah. Sarah's name is Sarah Weaver, and then it's scratched out, you can see, and then it's Sarah Williams, then scratched out for Sarah Weaver. Charles Williams, and then Edward. All but Edward appears to be their signatures as well. And I'll talk about Edward in future documents. The inventory took place in January 6th, several weeks after Moses Williams died. It's a modest estate. It's about under $100. It's appraised by a carpenter and a grocer. Again, there's names, there's people, possibly relationships, perhaps not. It's 3 pages. This is the first. The notable items on the first page are a Bible, valued at $1. It's probably about a working man's a day wage. An old fowling piece at $1.50. A ream of writing paper and sweet oil. Lauren tells me she suspects that may have been used in the profile cutting business. And I called out the broken violin, oil paintings, and small pictures. We also know that Moses from newspaper played the clarinet, so a musical man. The second page includes kitchen, what I suspect are your bedroom items. The profile machine is here. I mentioned it was $35 valuation. That's about 40% of the entire estate. There's also a set of books called Ancient History, 25 volumes, and a very large stove, which is the second highest valued item in the estate at $9. The page 3, the final page, has clothing and bedroom items. There's a fiddle you see on the screen, the fiddle case, quilting frame. There's wood in the cellar. There's something called a mixed coat. I'm sure somebody could let us know right away in the comments what exactly a mixed coat was. It seems to be a mixed set of clothing, pretty high valuation. Now, administering the estate. Charles is granted letters of administration. He is legally bound with a bond of $200 that he and one of the appraisers posted to be the administrator of Moses Williams' estate, of all singular goods, chattel, and debts of Moses Williams. He is required by the Orphans Court to file an inventory by March 3rd. We already know it was done. It's a January 6th document. It was filed late in February. And then he's given 1 year to settle the estate. So till February 3rd, 1832, and he must have all accounts taken for. So there's in the matter of distributing the estate. There's these 4 children are listed here. These are the 4 pages. I'll go through them individually. Daughter Louisa, presumably unmarried. She receives $23 worth of items. It's the largest number: furniture, bed, kitchen items, the quilting frame, lie stand, and half the amount of wood in the cellar. Sarah, I'll come back to her name in a second. Sarah receives 10 items, about $16 worth, including the stove. Edward, and this is on March 24th. Everybody but Edward's goods are distributed, or at least filed, on March 24th, 1831, within several months. Edward's is dated January 30th, 1832. It's one filing piece. Now, did Edward live elsewhere? Did he come in late and only get one item? Did his brothers and sisters freeze him out? Who knows? But at any rate, it raises new questions, as does the name of Sarah Swartz. She's Williams. She's Weaver in February 3rd, 1831. 6 weeks later or so, 7 weeks later, she's Sarah Swartz. I don't know what's happening. I haven't found out. So then Charles. Charles takes the second highest number of goods. He includes a Bible, the ancient history set, clothing, the paper, sweet oil. He also records having the $1,251 in cash that was left by the deceased and $21 for rent. I suspect that may have meant the rent paid to the arcade where Moses had been working since 1827 and is listed in directories. And that is leaving Charles. I guess Charles Coleman Sellers says he retired from the museum. He went into business for himself, had his own shop there. That's another story. But that apparently, and I think he's likely where he was working up until his death. Another thing that Charles Williams reported were some expenses in April 2nd. And they are repairs to the house. This is 10 Sterling Avenue, or Sterling Alley, sorry. Today it's Oriana Street. It is still an alley. It's still very narrow. It is between, on the north side, there's Ray Street. On the south side, it's Cherry. It's between 3rd and 4th Streets, east and west. And I think, again, if he's a carpenter, he's doing the work himself, mending the fence, painting and glazing, or hiring people, Venetian shutters, the gutters, and so forth. So there's another document in this file that was Charles Williams's account of cash advanced on the estate. Again, as the administrator, he had to account for every penny. And in this, we get a glimpse of the burial, the funeral and burial of Moses Williams. The document, I included some names that were included there. Sarah Miller is laying out the deceased. It's $5. William H. Moore, whose ad is above, he is an undertaker, is paid for a coffin. The internment is David Lack is paid $6.50. He's identified as a sexton. I learned pretty quickly he was a sexton at St. George's Methodist. Um, More on that in a minute. Abraham Holman is paid for horse's carriage, crepe linen, refreshments, suggesting there is a funeral service, there's reception, there's procession. Frederick Schaeffer is a Lutheran minister. He's got a big history, and he is paid $1 for the deceased. So perhaps attending to Moses at his death. I don't know. There's a Reformed church at the corner. There's many, many churches around. And again, the question of what churches the Williams family belonged to over the years is long, or the question is open, and the list is long. And then Ann McDonald is paid 53 cents. She's listed in the directory as a mangler, and people on this call, somebody knows more about that than I do, I'm sure. I suspect she was providing linens. The burial place of Moses Williams is revealed. Check my time. Is revealed by knowing when he died. We're able to go back. Ellen and I were aware of this record. We had it on one of our our lists of like possibilities. Could it be? Could it not be? We don't know. Suddenly, it makes sense. The Northwest Burial Grounds, burials from 1819 to 32. It's a book. It's digitized on that amazing collection, PhiladelphiaCongregations.org. The entry for Moses Williams is under strangers, which refers to people who are not members of the church. And his listing is December 20th, 1830. His age is 64, which, is kind of close enough if you know 19th century records, or even, as far as accuracy goes. That's another eureka moment. He is buried here. We know where he was buried. The detail in the center is from the Tanner map of Philadelphia in 1830. The burial ground is where 321, 318 is. That is present day Fairmont on the north, below that House of Refuge block, and on the left is 15th Street. On the right, sorry, I'll go back. On the right is 16th Street, 15th Street. On the left is 16th Street. So it's 1516 Fairmount, small street called North Street, full of houses now. That burial ground was closed in the 1870s, and supposedly bodies are reinterred. But we all know how that works. So that's a question as well. And then one other thing it's been mentioned before is, again, rereading sources when you know something just reveals new information, doesn't it? New insight. I pored over this book just to get to wondering if anybody else was buried near Moses Williams. There's no designation of race in this book. Records are, Philadelphia records I find are very inconsistent. Sometimes race is identified, sometimes it isn't. And then lo and behold, on the same page, 5 months later, there's a record in May 30th for a Mariah L. Swartz in the same burial plot. That didn't mean a damn thing before we knew about the probate records. Suddenly, Sarah Swartz, Mariah Swartz, is it a granddaughter? We don't know. The age is kind of obscured. It may be a 1 there, maybe an infant. Don't know. So what about, in closing now, what with the profile machine? You notice it wasn't on the list of distributions. There was one final account by Charles Williams, and that was the things that were not sold. So presumably there was either a private or a public sale. There's nothing in the newspaper advertising such a sale, but however that was done, it's mostly broken items and other household items and the profile machine. So it's kind of fitting, because there are still many questions. As much as these details have, I hope, have kind of helped fill in a little bit more about Moses Williams' life and his family. There's still many, many things we don't know. I still haven't learned very much at all about the children, about the family moving forward. We'll continue to do this work. But it kind of struck me as maybe symbolic. This profile machine, things not taken. It's 1830, the age, kind of a golden early age of profile making with the physiognotrace is kind of over. Williams is gone, and there we have it. The things not sold. So I want to close and say thanks for having me. There's my contact information if people like to connect later and raise some questions or maybe connect new dots and open new doors. I appreciate that. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Dean. I don't think all your thunder was stolen. I think you still had some big reveals there. So, as we have done before, please feel free to put questions and comments in the Q&A. I'll give people a moment to do that.
Or we're at that part of the day where everybody wants to move forward.
Everyone's just thinking about that beer and pretzel, the slide that you just showed.
Yards Brewery, which is right next door to the Philadelphia City Archives.
Okay. Here's a question. I noticed 4 oil paintings in the probate inventory. Any speculation as to what these might be?
I do not. I wondered, the valuation seems awfully low. And so I don't know. That's a short answer. Perhaps if Carol, and there's various pictures, but the valuations, I would expect more, but I don't know enough. Again, yeah, I have to see what I think the entire inventory. I have not subjected to smarter people than I and other experts to say, okay, what do we make of this? So there's more to be interpreted.
Okay. What's on the site of the Oriana Street house today?
Construction of, it looks like condos, and I know Faye Anderson is on this, and she is working on a marker on Moses and has visited Oriana Street. So maybe Faye might type in some answers, some more. But it looks like I was there in January, and it was just under construction, a very narrow street, alley street, and the houses are all gone. They were gone by the 18. I think that side of the street by the early 20th century, they were gone. The map I showed on the burial was a view of Sterling Alley in the 1870s. The houses were still there. The Williams house was a frame house, 2-story. He bought it in 1812. Someone earlier had asked a question about various addresses for Moses. So he lived earlier. The family had lived in the 1810 census, if I can go back to that, at Fifth Street and Race. And then he purchased this property in 1812, and I still don't know what happened to it in the 1830s, or when exactly it went out of the family's hands.
Can Dean speak to the frames he alluded to?
The frames that the suppliers that well, there's two things maybe. There were Moses Charles Williams paid 2 people who were framers and gilders out of the estate's money for supplies of frames. These brothers named Shermer. So in speaking to Lauren Muni, we theorized that they were supplying, at least near the end, Moses the small frames for profiles, because most profile cutters were by then were framing small wood, gilded frames, or putting the profiles in them, and as part of the purchase price. If there's anything more than that, yeah.
We have a suggestion from someone as to what a mangler might be. They write, wouldn't a mangler be someone who operated a mangle, maybe in a textile mill?
Yeah, that's the definitions I traced were those, and then I just threw the idea that perhaps he prefers the linen, or maybe it's just I don't know, yeah. I probably should have left that alone, but that is her occupation. Everybody else, there is something describing the service they provided. For her, there wasn't.
Someone asks, what happened to his Sue's Mariah?
Spouse.
Okay. Spouse Mariah.
In the Peale family telling, Mariah left the family. The marriage broke up. And between 1810 and 1820, the census does suggest that by 1820, there doesn't seem to be a female in the household who would be Mariah's age. So, but we don't know. Again, marriage broke up. at some point. The children, I think those four children were well, I think the four children who are in these documents were born before 1810. The ages seem right. Um, but there are those other two names that show up in records Ellen has found that may or may not be Williams' children. But we have no trace of Mariah Williams later.
Um, I'm sorry if I missed this. I've read in 1823, Williams had to sell his two-story house. Was that a different house, or is that no longer believed?
That is property. He did sell, he acquired other property in Northern Liberties, the neighborhood in Philadelphia to the north, over Callow Hill Street, Vine Street up to a little bit to the north. He acquired property there in about the same time, even before he bought the Sterling Alley house. In 1823, there's this whole flurry of activity between the Peels, and he sold his property, and so did Rubens. And there's letters that suggest that Charles Peale was pushing for the sales. That is not the same property as the home. That's the short answer. It's a different property. And it may or may not have been improved upon. It may have been an empty lot. The value is pretty low. But he did, did invest and own property at different times.
And in circling back to the question about Oriana Street, Faye Anderson chimed in saying, as Dean said, Oriana Street is now residential, mostly condos. Once paved with cobblestones, the granite blocks of Oriana Street were added to the Philadelphia Register of Historic Places, Historic Street Paving Thematic District in 1998. And we also have someone saying, mangler. I have used a mangle. You get the moisture out of something that way prior to hanging the item to dry. Hard work. And it does sound like it. A comment, the children would all have to be legal adults by the time of probate, or else they would have had guardians in legal documents.
Right, correct. I suspect they're all in they're all in the 20s. I don't, we can theorize about the birth order or if Charles was, but yeah. And the 1810, we've done the mashings of the census and trying to figure out what to frame the possible years. I think they're all born. Yeah, I think they're all by their early to middle 20s, from early to late 20s by the time of Moses Williams' death, and he's 54. Yeah, and I think back to Moses Williams' birth. I might be wrong, but I think it's documented that his mother was pregnant when the Peale family and household and his mother and father arrived in June in Philadelphia in June of 1776, June or July. And anyway, that's.
I think that's in the edited papers, that story.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Yeah, just toward that birth date of, say, August, or birth month of August, roughly, of 1776.
And I just want to interject a huge kudos and thanks to Ellen and Dean for really nailing down the birth and the death dates. That is huge.
Well, that goes along with the comment I was going to wrap this section up with, is someone wrote, thanks to everyone for the great archival research. So, here.
Thank you for the online folks and for every librarian and archivist and everywhere, right? Sorry.
Okay. And with that, let's move on to our final presenter, Lauren Mooney, who is a silhouette artist and researcher. And her presentation is entitled Moses Williams, A Technical View.
Thanks everyone to attending. My name is Lauren Mooney. I'm a traditional silhouette artist using only scissors and paper to create this traditional and beloved portrait form for modern communities. I hope to introduce you to Moses Williams' technical abilities and the world he enters. His story captured my attention in my research and studies, and I hope it captures yours. In my short time, I hope to give thoughts to seek underneath academic writings to appreciate Moses's technical work, which shouts volumes that most people cannot hear. The previous speakers have presented a fuller picture of milestones in Moses's life. I will be filling in details which they may have bypassed. I'll define these commonly misunderstood words. A profile, this means a side view of a person's face. It could mean any portrait of the side of the face. It was often called profile likenesses, as the representation was supposed to be like the person. There were other words like black shades, shadowgraphs, and a few names, but not necessarily made with a shadow. Silhouette. As Carol did mention, this came from a French finance minister, Etienne de Silhouette, who was hated by wealthy people for asking the wealthy to pay taxes. They considered him cheap, and therefore anything cost-cutting was called a la silhouette. Profiles were considered cheap versions of painted portraits. This word silhouettes for black portraits came into use after 1830 to raise the status of exceptionally fine all-black profiles, especially by detailed artists. We currently use the phrases silhouette and profile interchangeably in our modern English language. I will attempt to lay out the subjects surrounding Moses's work, what portraits and thoughts came before Moses, what tools Moses was using, why his work was different, how you can see his talent, and what did people do with his portraits. In this image, as Ellen had shown you the map of the museum, you'll see the room where he worked out the physiognotrace machine and the layout of the museum. And you can see the distortion of the photo in the book. And then you can see a painting where it's actually laid out in a drawing. Physiognotrace machines were invented by various people in France and Germany first. The original designs were made to create full-size exact portraits, then engravings, and to reduce the final portrait to make many copies. We can also call this a profile machine if you don't want to pronounce physiognotrace. There's two ways of pronouncing that, physiognotrace and physiognotrace, and the latter is the way the French pronounce it. Charles Willson Peale requested the inventor John Isaac Hawkins to make him a similar machine to what has been seen in Europe so that the profiles could be made in the Peale Museum. Peale was promoting the concept of what they consider the science of reading faces, which is physiognomy, and also to get additional public attention for his museum. This topic is complicated and interesting, but we don't have time to discuss it here. In fact, it takes me about an hour to discuss it outside of here. So, traveling inventors, not always artists, created and toured the new United States with similar profile machines because they also sensed the opportunity to make income. They mostly ignored the science of reading faces. Customers who entered the Peale Museum in Philadelphia would pay 25 cents to enter the museum. This would have been a big sum of money to a common laborer. 25 cents was half a day's wage. So this meant that most visitors to the museum were of middle or higher economic classes. If visitors wanted a portrait, they would pay 1 cent to operate the physiognotrace machine themselves. Paper, scissors, and the machine were provided by the museum. So technically, any person could go into the Peale Museum to use the profile machine, either to trace around the face himself or herself, or ask a friend or passerby to do it. This machine essentially traced around the face with a stylus of metal. You can see in this drawing, there's a black and white version of the colored version that Carol had shown, and then you can see it transposed onto the profile machine that was recreated by the Peale Museum in Baltimore, and that's what was already mentioned. And then wait till the next slide to see how it worked. But you can see it in a drawing and then kind of live modern day reproduced. So this machine essentially traced around the face with a stylus of metal. Simultaneously, the machine's action reduced a tracing of this of the tracing of the face using a pantograph located at the top of the machine. A stylus or pencil results in a tiny profile. The final image is only a fraction of the size of a person's head and not yet cut out. So here's some steps, and I have to go through everything really quickly. I'm sorry, but I'm doing my best to explain it to you, and then maybe the questions later can help. Starting in 1803, for 6 cents, raised later to 8 cents, visitors to Peale Museum could hire a machine operator, Moses Williams, to trace the face of the visitor. The cost of 8 cents was probably the cost of a middle-class dinner. This was not a poor man's portrait. The actual poor couldn't pay for a portrait, or wouldn't decide to pay for a portrait. Here is my attempt to show you in brief how Moses may have worked the portraits. My example is basic and does not show you the details of his exquisite work, which can be only seen when looking in person, not by seeing online. So let's look at the steps notated in this slide. There are two different elements to making a profile with a physiognotrace machine. One, the machine is traced around the face. That's my face in a physiognotrace. So the picture on the screen at the left is my face in the physiognomic machine at the Independence Hall. There's a reproduction there. So that's, you can see my face there, and then the little circle that shows where the stylus or the gnomon face around the face. By the way, physiognomy means knowing nature. So the gnomon really is tracing around the face to know the face. So once again, the machine trace around the face, and two, the second part is the cutting. They're two different processes. The more beautiful as well as aesthetic process is the cutting part. The paper was made from cotton or linen rag cloth from Amy's Dove Mill at Mill Creek, Lower Merion Township, Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, and this was the same wove paper supplied to the Second Bank of the United States. The paper is folded twice before insertion in the machine, and an example of inscribed paper that hasn't yet been cut out is seen in the upper right. I'm not sure what each of your screens are showing, but if you're looking at the screen, you're going to see a kind of like a scratched in facial image on a light colored piece of paper in the right hand side. Tried to use the sharpen so you can see more, but it's really obvious when you're looking in person. After the shape is scratched out onto the paper can be cut. The hollow cuts are difficult to cut out the center easily, accurately, or rapidly. A person using the scissors is literally working from the inside to the outside, and the scissors can catch on the paper. I just want to also point out that the picture of the scissors in this photo is actually kind of like a misrepresentation. The scissors generally would be kind of on the inside in a way. I just couldn't get a photograph of the scissors on the inside. It would just be like a little point of scissors. But it's on the inside of the paper, and it's really easy to get the scissors caught in the paper, especially when you're cutting that out. I can't adequately tell you how difficult the cutting of the hollow of a silhouette is, especially this tiny, which I'll explain. Other profile machine silhouette artists could do good work too, but they only work for a few for a few years at a time. In the lower right-hand corner, you'll see original silhouettes from a silhouette album at the Library Company. On the left side of the example is what Peale called the blockhead, which is the part that's cut out from the center. On the right, in the lower right-hand picture, is an example of the paper with that center blockhead silhouette removed, allowing the deep blue black of the silhouette's colored paper background to be showing through. The blue paper is the hollow cut silhouette. So I'll show you more. So let's look at details of Moses' work here. It was Moses' success in making silhouettes which won him financial freedom, and thereby being released from his enslavement 1 year earlier than the law permitted. It was culturally required that all independent adults make their own living. Moses seemed to have made an excellent living cutting silhouettes, potentially earning between $500 and $700 a year during an era when $300 was an average wage for a year for a man working at labor. Moses worked as a profile artist for 30 years during a time when most profile artists worked for an average of only 4 years. It was also extraordinary for people to pay cash to a man of color in the early 1800s, at least for a piece of work that they really valued, not just cash for cleaning clothes, etc. I don't mean to denigrate anybody of color who had a laboring job. This was a very high status artistic presentation, so we have to definitely give him credit for that, of course. I think that Moses was a good visualizer who made his tools work well for him. As some artists work well with paint, Moses was able to use scissors. Moses's talent and professionalism benefited by being connected to a museum, not itinerant, for it provided him encouragement and support and a constant supply of customers from the beginning, plus in a scientific setting. So here's where we get to see Moses' scissor work. I'm not sure what your screen shows, but I have sharpened this image so you could see a lot and then given you a lot of crazy drawn arrows, which is the way I think anyway. Crazy drawn arrows in my head. We know that this was cut at the Peale Museum because of the museum stamp. We can assume that it was made by Moses because he was frequently complimented by Peale as the best operator of the machine. However, Moses, like many profile artists, seems to have never signed any profile. The machine uses a stylus to trace around a person's face, as I showed you in a previous picture. It's uncomfortable to have an object scraping over your face, so the machine does not capture exact shapes of the face well. A careful observer can see the outsized machine marks left in the soft paper. This is hard to see in real life if you go and you see one in person, unless you're using a loupe, which is a very intense magnifier. I have sharpened the photo to increase the lines so you can see where the physiognotrace machine would have deviated from what you see as the final portrait. Moses obviously had a good observation of anatomy and was able to recut the shape of the person's face after the paper was removed from the machine. He probably recut the profile freehand, but with the machine-made profile as a slight guide. And you can see that it was a slight guide because some of the machine stylus, it kind of went all over the place. So he had to recut it. You see this a lot in many of his work, and with the loupe, the magnifier, you can even see more. It's important to note that the portraits are so small, it takes very delicate scissor work to make these turns in the paper. I have to say only a silhouette artist would actually know the detail of the difficulty of doing this, but turning the paper with scissors is, and making good cuts is very difficult. The paper size is 4 inches by 5 inches, and the silhouette size is only 2 inches by 3 inches. The embossed impression of the museum's logo was made with a seal press, and I've given you an example of a seal press in the upper corner. It's not the Peale seal press, but I just wanted you to see what they're like. Official papers had embossed seals with wax, so adding embossed logo was a great marketing idea. The Peale Museum profiles had at least 2 embossed designs. I've seen 3, but I'm just going to call it 2 for now. One of them may have been Raphael Peale's itinerant press, his seal that he put into paper. These tiny machines had a top die and a bottom die, and when they're squeezed a paper in between, they can create words or designs. And the Peale Museum seal, the Peale Museum stamp had both. A portable seal machine invention specifically for just paper may have been patented in 1782. Moses Williams displayed significant talent, especially as a self-taught artist. Hollow cut silhouettes are very difficult, as I've said, to cut because cutting inside the paper can catch the silhouette, the scissors on the paper. The blockhead, which is the center of the paper, and the hollow cut profile had to be exact because the blockhead was saved and often used for studies of physiognomy or face reading. I think that due to the needed precision to read personality from the profiles, excellent profiles were at least encouraged and possibly demanded by Peale himself. These light-colored blockheads, the cast-offs of the silhouettes that were on the inside, were often mounted on handmade black paper and often saved. Commercially made colored paper was recently invented, but no black paper yet. I'll get to that. Moses used tiny scissors as seen as in this ad for lost scissors. The ad is on the right, and a possibility of the type of scissors that he had could be on the left. The German population in Philadelphia may have included in their the paper cutting traditions. Paper cutting is called Scherenschnitte in German. Schere meaning scissors, Schnitte meaning cut. So perhaps small German paper cutting scissors like these, shown at left, would have been available in Philadelphia. The size of those scissors is about 3.5 inches, and extremely sharp tips and narrow blades. And I can answer the person's question about the scissors at the end. The question that came up earlier, I can answer it later. Here are example silhouettes of his talent. I'll try to explain, but silhouettes are the best seen in person. Authentic silhouettes are small and just sometimes half the size of your palm. Example A, I saw this exact same silhouette in 2 cities. In this example is album example in Colonial Williamsburg, and also an album at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Each was a family album, so I imagine that copies were given to family members. This one was backed by black silk and sewn into a family album. It was a new idea to give an inexpensive portrait of relatives or friends and have enough copies to give away. It was an outstanding concept as well as a new marketing idea, which the Peales especially used to use their creative genius to create initial and then long-lasting interest for their profiles, and then therefore for Moses's work. The entire album in which I found example A was a hand-sewn album, hand-sewn into a handmade silhouette albums. Just like you create an album of family photos, it was in fact what one might consider as an early photo album, but without the photos. In February 1803, Peale placed an ad in the American Daily Advertiser recommending the public make profiles just to give away to their loved ones. This was a brand new concept, just invented in this era, only available with these relatively inexpensive portraits. So remember, before this era, portraits were painted one-off and expensive. So silhouette B shows Charles Willson Peale's daughter, I've been working on this name, Sophonisba, with added India ink curls and ruffled details. This ink is not very common with Peale Museum silhouettes, but I suspect it may have been more common when there was no customer line, and or it was connected to a family member. The lines of this ink are very fine, carefully studied how real curls are made. The artist, probably Moses, was an exquisite observer. As I said, the commercially made colored paper was just recently invented, but no black paper yet. From all indications, these look like hand-tinted or hand-coated black backgrounds were made by the Peale Museum, perhaps even Moses himself. We don't know when this scrapbook at least shown here, was made, whether it was in the time of the silhouettes in the next generation or generations later. So these are example silhouettes from the library company. So as you can see, the background of the scrapbooks are quite different in color. The top book seems to have a pigment made with Prussian blue using wove paper. The bottom seems to be laid paper background. Those are 2 different types of paper. It's easy to say that the laid paper is made in the 18th century. Wove paper starts in the beginning of the 19th century. And both of them seem to be handmade. And then the bottom one is blacker with a bluish tint. Just as an aside, I've given you a QR code for a paper that I wrote about the making of back of silhouettes. If you wanted to scan it, I can also send you the link to the paper, and I also have the original paper that was before publishing. That is what I call the super nerdy version that has a lot of footnotes. That's not in the published version. So there is a quote from Charles Coleman Sellers' book, Mr. Peale's Museum, which says, occasionally one of the younger Peales or an artist friend would sit nearby coloring the profiles. We don't know if this was making the black backgrounds or coloring the rare curls seen in the previous slide. Regarding an element of how we present silhouettes today, frames, we know that we know that frames are sold at the Peale Museum for 50 cents. That was the cost of 1 day's wage for a laborer, and then later went up to $1 a day for laborers. And that 2, Moses Williams' estate had several empty frames. This may mean that he sold frames from his own personal profile business after he retired from the museum. We do not have any images or description of those frames. It's important for you all to realize that when museums receive an item from a donor, perhaps a museum buys an object at auction, the time may have changed that object. In the case of frames objects created in the early 1800s, the objects could have been framed at that time or framed decades or centuries later, or perhaps never been framed. So we can imagine that some silhouettes were framed in a circle frame. We know that because the circle is retained. We know that this circle may be all that remains, and you can see that in the lower left hand, the lowermost left picture. See this quote, frames were turned out by museum workers and others. Peale made a punch that could cut cardboard and black paper in one operation. The quote goes on to mention a circle shape within the frame. So we do not know whether each silhouette was backed by black at the point of sale. There is some contemporaneous evidence that some silhouettes were given to the customer completely hollow, and I have that information in my paper. I'm not pushing my paper, it's just if somebody wants to read more. But if you want to read my paper, it looks good. Charles Willson Peale delivered to his son Raphael Peale 500 to 3,000 frames at a time when Raphael Peale was doing a profile itinerancy through the South. We can therefore assume that Moses' business in the Peale Museum was also supported with frames as well. We do not know either Moses or the Peale Museum framed the silhouettes on site. Well, actually, we kind of do, because there was a mention in one of the previous speakers that that the Gill's profile had to wait and have something framed. So maybe sometimes, maybe for best customers, maybe for other customers, maybe it was asked to be framed later at the museum, but that doesn't happen with itinerants. I am providing a few silhouette frames of Moses's era, but these are not Moses's silhouettes nor his frames. I just wanted to show you different types of frames from the era. I think that probably the frames that he would most likely would have had may be at the top, because we mentioned the circle. There is speculation in academic papers that Moses created this self-portrait and proclaimed himself the cutter of profiles. My scientific colleagues always said that I had to make scientific proof, so let's look at the work itself from a technical point of view. The writing on the back, and you can see the back also in this picture, it's the right-hand side image. The writing on the back is period handwriting, probably copperplate script with his name. We do not have proof that it is his handwriting. The front writing looks to be a more modern writing, specifically a handwriting which debuted in the early 20th century, the Zehner Bloser handwriting style. I suggest, in the light of the many graceful profiles that I have seen of what we think is Moses's work, and the glowing, respectful descriptions from Charles Willson Peale for Moses's work, I suggest that this cutting is too crude to be Moses's delicate, typical cutting. The jerky cutting near the bottom of the hair would be more indicative of someone struggling with the tools, either tracing the face with the machine or the scissors, or both. There is no stamp on the silhouette. Because we have no facts about the lack of stamp, we can't determine why there was a lack of stamp. So here, I have this idea. It was another person either training with the physiognotrace machine, the first step in making profiles, or cutting it out, the second step in making profiles, or both. Then it was then identified with Moses's name and the title he held at the Peale Museum. I suggest that this other person was operating the machine and cutting, perhaps practicing. There's also an eyelash drawn with ink. It was rare for an eyelash to be drawn into Peale silhouettes. It was rare for Peale silhouettes to even have an eyelash cut. For anyone thinking that this was Moses who made this silhouette as a self-portrait, it is also possible that Moses was making a self-portrait, but that Moses was having a bad day making silhouettes. It happens. Or it was early enough in his career that the delicate silhouettes that we have seen more often were in his more experienced years. It's also technically possible to trace one's own face with the profile machine and then to cut out the indicated lines. But one would not know whether the indicated lines were a good likeness of oneself because one cannot see one's own face to cut out the drawn lines on the paper versus the using scissors. It is also possible that he used two mirrors to look at his own profile using scissors to refine the poor scribing by the profile machine. However, until a diary in Moses' own handwriting arises, or somebody in his own circle saw him create it, we can't be positive that it is a self-portrait. Most of the other details about the silhouette point away from it being created by his own hand, in my personal view. But we can still value the silhouette as a snapshot of Moses in one period of time, whether or not it is a self-portrait. Moses has a vast value in Philadelphia history and in American art history. So, Moses may have, he obviously died in 1830, so he did stop working, and it was around, I think they said 1827 that he stopped working. So why did Moses end his successful silhouette enterprise? I have a couple ideas. We don't clearly know. Moses left no diary nor letters, so please allow me to extrapolate about the 1830s silhouette portraiture and photography. So here is my educated guess from studying the eras. It is my current belief that Moses' own silhouette business came to a slow close with a decreasing interest in profiles due to the many artists, good and bad, and untalented physiognotrace operators who flooded the mid-Atlantic in the early 1800s. Silhouette history shows a decline of interest in silhouettes. Moses himself was placed in different parts of the Peale Museum, for example, operating the perpetual motion machine in 1813. Perhaps he was called back to the profile machine only when necessary, but he was otherwise sent around the museum when needed. Charles Willson Peale himself indicates that Moses is assigned to duties around the museum, and Moses seems to be good with spatial solutions like the mammoth head and public engagement like the perpetual motion machine. So I think that additional portrait forms arose, what you now consider folk art, and profiles started to get a bad name due to bad operators, charlatans, and an overfull marketplace in many parts of the country. Profiles declined around 1830, although the Peale Museum continued with profiles into the 1830s. There were two women who continued working there. Peale's death was in 1827, and the museum was left to his sons. But by the 1840s, the museum had closed, and then the artifacts were sold off. So I just want to go on. It wasn't all doom and gloom for silhouettes, because in the late 1830s, all new freehand artists would pick up the profile business again. Profiles were renamed from profiles or likenesses. They were renamed as silhouettes. And these freehand artists started making exceptional black silhouette portraits. They discarded using machines, which may be the reason why the profile machine was not sold from Moses's his probate. They discarded machines and focused on hand cutting with the eye and scissors alone. The free-handed scissor craft continued through the 19th century and into the 20th century when rare people like me practice it. Many people say that photography killed off the silhouette business. I disagree for the most part. While photography did enter the major population centers in the 1840s, it was not commonly popular nor cheap until the later in the 1800s. So it looks like other forces paused the silhouette business in the short time, allowing new artists to reinvigorate the trade. So, thanks. It's been a real pleasure to help shed new light on an exceptional early American artist of any skin color, Moses Williams.
Thank you, Lauren. We have time. I want to make sure that anyone who has a question directly prompted by Lauren's presentation has an opportunity to ask it now. And then I'd like to circle back for the remaining couple of minutes that we might have to just let anybody jump in on some of the more general questions. So if you have something specific for Lauren, please write it in soon.
If you wanted to go back to even some of the technical questions that were asked earlier,
Okay.
I'm happy to even answer some of those. And
okay.
Go ahead and ask.
Well, here is a question. Were there any period sources that provided instructions in cutting profiles as opposed to drawing them? Or was this largely a self-taught practice?
I have found in some information that it was not considered, it was so, not even so commonplace. It was not considered worthwhile to talk about it. There was a British author who even said, there's even nothing to talk about this. But most people were self-taught who did it. And I think that there were a lot of drawing books about it, but there didn't seem to be a lot of contemporaneous manuals for this.
Okay. We have someone asking, how were multiple copies made?
The paper was folded over. So I'm just going to take this piece of paper. Silhouette, when it's cut out, it's multiple copies. And even in the Library Company of Philadelphia, there are some entire pieces of paper that the silhouettes are not removed from that one piece of paper.
Do we have any idea how long it took Mr. Williams to produce a profile?
We don't know how long it took himself, but we do have descriptions from other artists who said mere moments. For me, when I'm cutting a freehand silhouette and I don't need a machine, it's to make a silhouette that I can hand the sitter, it's anywhere from 90 seconds to 120 seconds. And my colleague, and I've been doing it for almost 18 years, my colleague in England cutting freehand, he can do it in about 35, 40 seconds.
And just a follow-up to your paper folding demonstration. Okay, so we can get up to 4 per set, then you would need to make a new silhouette. Is that correct?
So Charles Willson Peale had into his book, he had a description of how you could make more silhouette copies. It's essentially a monograph, how he's making new copies, essentially covering with a kind of ink and a varnish, and you can essentially make almost stamped extra silhouettes. There are examples of this, and in the selected, I think it's the selected works, the Peale papers, the published Peale papers, there's a drawing in there. And unless you're someone technical like me, a regular person is not going to notice that or get information from it. But I noticed it, and I saw how he reproduced using a monograph technique.
This is a question from much earlier on. Is there an article or book about Moses Williams that you would share? And I think that's a question where we can just open it up to any of our presenters who might want to jump in. And I think in some cases, some of you have even mentioned the work that you have done, but if someone would like to reiterate good sources.
I don't know of one other than what some of the people are doing now. And I think that, are you inviting everyone else to come back?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Please, everybody else who was a
Yeah.
presenter, feel free to jump in. And if you have suggestions of articles or books about Moses Williams, please share them now.
There's a couple. There's Ellen's sharing hers.
Okay.
There are several papers out there. I know that Wendy Bellion, who's actually on this participants, she wrote something. Anne Verpaint wrote something. There are many. I believe that Anne Verpaint has written about it. Gwendolyn Dubrow-Shaw wrote a paper. There are many people who have written papers, but as far as I know, there's no book currently published about him.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of literature like that out there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, good.
Your camera isn't on, but we can hear you, Carol.
Yes, I tried. I'm sorry. No, there's a lot of literature, yet there's a lot to be sifted through and sorted out, and there's a lot of contradictions in between things. So we have a good level of information coming up. It sort of has to be assimilated and put and applied to an individual. Moses Williams has one set of issues. Charles Willson Peale and what he might have been doing has another. So, there I am. Sorry.
Here. Welcome back, Carol. It is just about 3:30, so I feel like we probably need to wrap things up, unless any of our presenters have a final word they want to say. I will do the wrap up.
I would like to. I'd like to say something.
Please.
I'm sorry, Nancy. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Whatever. I was just a word of thanks to you all, and especially you, Sarah, and all the team, and Win and everybody at the library company for hosting us.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us.
Yes, this really was Carol's brainchild that we all just helped out with. But I want to extend thanks to all of our speakers. It was really great to hear different perspectives. And also to thank our attendees who spent 2.5 hours of their valuable time with us finding Moses Williams. And also be sure to keep an eye out for the link for this program. It will be coming, I think, in about a week from the library company. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.